thank you all for coming. Welcome to this panel on Social Security. It's a really, really important and old subject. You can look at many reports from 10, 20 years ago that have really not been implemented in the ways that the people writing those reports. And that's true for most reforms in India. We know what to do, we don't know how to do it. But I think Social Security really matters because we don't live in an economy, we live in a society. But Social Security is really an intersection of economy and society. But the world has really changed from when Bismarck invented Social Security in Germany, where life expectancy was 31 when he promised to pay pensions at 45. So he wasn't really planning to pay them. And now with life expectancy being in the 60s and 70s, the question is, how do the three payers, governments, employers, and individuals pay for this Social Security? Because Europe is, in some sense, Europe is often held up as the model Social Security model. But Angela Merkel just said Europe is 7% of the world's population, 25% of the world's GDP, and 50% of the world's social spending. And her point was it's unsustainable. And I think in the last sort of 20, 30 years, Europe has depended on cheap labor from China, cheap security from America, and cheap energy from Russia. And I think that has changed. So whether they'll be able to sustain their system really has to be seen. So it's a wonderful topic. There are lots of different angles. We have a wonderful panel with different thought worlds on the subject. But let me start off with you, Renuka. Can you just give us your preliminary thoughts on sort of how do you pay for Social Security? Because that is sort of, as an economist, you've thought about, financing is as important as delivery. So how should a society, because you can either fund it by debt, you can fund it by taxes, you can fund it from corporates, you can fund it from individuals. So how do we think about finance? And then just since you've been involved in EPFO and ESIC, on what you think should change there from an employer thought world perspective.
Okay, thank you, Manish. I think that, typically the world over, Social Security has been financed through taxpayers' money and tied very closely to employers. Now, this works in an OECD context where everybody has an employer, so to speak, and the demographics were in such a way that you had enough taxpayers paying for a few elderly, and life expectancy was lower, and so the fiscal mathematics just always worked out. I think that world has changed, and we need to recognize that fact. And before I come to financing, I think there are two big aspects of Social Security. One is retirement security, and one is health. And they are very different and need to be thought of quite differently. And when we say Social Security, we often club them together, but these are very different things. And I'll talk about retirement security first. Uh, there is, I think, a big case to be made for taxpayers' money to go into means-tested pensions programs like, the IGNOAPS today, where you give a top-up or a direct benefit transfer to those who find themselves destitute in old age. Australia, for example, has a means tested age pension that is given to people who fall below certain asset and income limits. And that is the taxpayers' contribution to Social Security, if you will, and it's a pay as you go system. And I feel that is certainly, there is a role for the state and taxpayers' money in that instance. However, once you move away from the means tested age pension to everybody else, the best way, in my sense, and the most sustainable way to build up pension wealth, if you will, is a scheme where you could have co-contributions. So whether it's your employer or whether it's the state as your employer, or whether it's the state who's giving those in the informal sector an incentive to build up pension wealth, the better way to finance these is to do upfront contributions and design co-contribution schemes so that people can invest in their pension accounts and build up pension wealth so that you don't have liability that you just don't know where it is going to balloon, and which direction it is going to go. So in that sense, you are capping the liability for the taxpayer by saying that all financing will happen through a co-contribution mechanism. And you could do this in various ways. For example, the NPS Light and the NPS Swavalamban schemes that were there in 2015 for informal sector workers were a co-contribution model where the state was giving an incentive to people to build up pension wealth. So I think that
Could I push back saying that I've heard people say that, look, if the state doesn't bear investment risk and longevity risk, individuals don't have broad enough shoulders. So how should, yes, you have capped your fiscal liability, but you have put the risks of longevity, the risks of investments, the risks of running out your savings on individuals. How would you respond to that?
So again, two things, right? I think we need to separate the accumulation phase from the drawdown phase. So when we say social security for retirement security, again, the space gets very muddled, because when we talk about savings, we are talking about the accumulation phase. Whereas when we talk about pensions, we are talking about the drawdown phase when certain accumulations have been built up. And in the accumulation phase, again, there are various models. And there is a risk return trade off. So for example, you might say that you don't want individuals to bear the investment risk and put them in government bonds. That's what we have done in India on the EPFO, for example, largely very conservative investments. But what you're doing with that is you are capping the upside for the same very people. So you're ensuring that they will never reach high accumulations, because there is absolutely no risk that is being taken. And there are ways to solve this. You could have default options that, over a life cycle, people change, investment profile changes, so that the burden is not on the individual, but there is enough of a leeway where, you're over time going into more risk averse or more secure instruments than when you are younger. And I think that there's certainly a role to be played in that sense. And on longevity risk, I agree. I think it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge the world over. And there again, I think we need to really think about underlying instruments, right? So how do you price an annuity? Because ultimately, what is a pension? It is where you are purchasing an annuity and the insurance company is doing actuarial calculations and coming up with a price of an annuity. And how do you do index linked annuities? Sorry, inflation linked annuities. So you need underlying instruments where you have inflation index bonds, or you have good derivatives markets where some of this hedging can be done by financial companies. And I think that's the missing link, because it's all very easy to say that risk should not be borne by individuals, but eventually it is borne by taxpayers. So you can't wish risk away. It is there. And we need to find better models of,
How to share?
figuring out how should be borne, and they exist. I mean, none of this is rocket science, and we just need to open our eyes to these possibilities and put them into practice.
Let me come back to you with the specific ESI EPFO questions. Maybe I can, Dr. Ghosh and Nilanjan. What are your thoughts when you hear Renuka say that, look, I mean, we do need to cap fiscal, we do need individuals, longevity risk is real. And my reaction as an employer that, look, employers don't pay salaries, shareholder customers do, shareholders don't pay salaries. So employers don't live as long as they used to. When the first Fortune 500 list came out, employer, the average life expectancy was 64. Now it's 15. So employers don't live. What is the value of a pension promise of a company that? So just broader lessons globally and your thoughts on what Renuka said, and what do you think the world offers us, or is there a birth defect in the current thinking of Social Security?
Uh, when I was listening to Renuka, one thing actually occurred to me. I mean, my father retired around 25 years ago, and he was working, in fact, in the private sector. He retired with a pool of money, didn't have pension or whatever, and the value of his savings, of course, declined over time. A,
Mhm.
B, the return on that savings, that entire pool is also declining over time, given the fact that the interest rates are declining. Now, what we have been forcing all these guys, in fact, to get into a riskier move, to get into the stock market or suppose the equity market, so that they can maintain their standards of living where they were. So, I mean, the very purchasing power of the old age is declining, whereas their medical costs are increasing. Now, given this, we already have a very fragmented structure as far as the pension scheme or the retirement scheme is concerned, because just look at this entire system. For salaried employees, it's EPFO, which is a mandatory savings scheme where both employers and employees are contributing towards the retirement benefits. We have the NPS, it's a voluntary scheme that allows the government and the private sector. For those, in fact, in the unorganized sector, now we have the Atal Pension, APY, Atal Pension Yojana, providing a guaranteed pension of around 1,000 to 5,000 INR per month. Then we have the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan, which offers a pension of 3,000 rupees, then farmers' pension scheme as well. We do not
Mhm.
have a comprehensive, streamlined pension framework covering all the citizens equally.
Mhm.
And that is why the UPS, which is now being talked of, is going to be important. Now, given this, uh, we rank possibly among the 48 countries. In fact, in the 2024 versus CFA Institute Global Pension Index, we are among the last among 48 countries. So our score is 44 out of 100, whereas we have Netherlands, Iceland, where I don't want to compare, but there are state-funded pension models that guarantee universal coverage.
Also,
Now,
they are rich. It's a luxury good. They are rich countries.
yeah, of course, to that extent, yes. The fact also remains that when the state hasn't intervened, let's also look at suppose the lower income group. Now, who has offered social security in India? It is essentially the market force that has offered social security in India. When just remember the COVID situation during the lockdown, we could make that out because the state couldn't intervene and the social security was lost because the market forces were locked down at that point in time.
But
So
the family offered social
family
security.
offered. So how were they offering? Out of where did they earn this? Because it was the market forces. So it was either, in fact, if you look at this entire demographic movement of population from the agricultural sector to the services sector to the tertiary sector without by completely bypassing the secondary sector, it is pretty clear that the cushion offered to these poor people were essentially by the market forces because it's pretty organic in nature. So now the question is that can we replicate other models? Our low ranking is attributed to low pension coverage, inadequate retirement income, lack of regulatory oversight, unlike most nations that have state-backed pension schemes. So our retirement scheme is contribution based. Several countries have established a pension scheme that provides security and sustainability for their aging populations. In fact, in many cases, there are schemes that exist for the aging population. It's not only in the context of pensions or whatever. There are at least 12 schemes, but most of them are not known to the population as such. This
But
is something,
is the problem information asymmetry? Because
of course, this is information asymmetry
but isn't it
because
also the fiscal capacity? Public debt to GDP is 80%, fiscal deficits are quite high. So if we say that the state should provide pensions, I mean, it is also subject to the ability of the state. Ought implies can, right? As Kant used to say. So the state ought to provide pension implies that the state can provide pension. So just given the fiscal deficit situation in many state governments and just outstanding public debt, if we want to be good ancestors, Jonas Sachs used to say the only question is being a good ancestor. So by loading on future pension liabilities, are we being good ancestors onto the
I
state?
now how do we essentially, is it possible to replicate the other models like say the overlapping generations kind of a framework
Mhm.
why on the basis of which suppose it is essentially the younger population providing for the older population
Mhm.
out of whatever our tax GDP ratio is substantially low, no
Mhm.
doubt about that. And given that it's barely 11%, whereas in fact in most of the other nations, developed nations, or the global north, which is offering the social security, they have a tax GDP ratio of greater than 30%. And this is definitely the differentiating factor. Now, how do we get into this framework? Are we going to create some kind of a market for social security and draw the private sector into this game? How do we do that? Create that poolable fund.
Yes.
That remains the question.
That remains the question. So let me come back to solutions after I bring in everybody's thoughts on the broader question. I think you, both Renuka and you, will have thoughts on how to bring in the private sector. I'll come to Yogi last because he's been one of the biggest employers. So once he hears Nitin, maybe could we hear your thoughts on your reactions to Renuka's sort of worry about fiscal situation and Dr. Ghosh is that the government has to provide it, but we have to figure out how to finance it. What are your thoughts? Both the what is this? I mean, I've heard people say that it's a civilizational good, but it is also a luxury good. Yes, a good civilization takes care of its elderly, but it also has to be able to afford it. So, in a world of aging populations, in a world of fiscal deficits, what do you think is the future and the current state of Social Security?
Thanks, Manish. Uh, I started thinking about it seriously uh, during COVID. And I think Nilanjan just mentioned how social security happened during COVID. People literally collected money for each other, right? It's like you had domestic help who needed help. You pass the hat around. You had some colleague who needed help. You pass the hat around. And there were also online platforms like Give India, Milap, etc., where you could put up the name of a deserving person and circulate it on social media, and all your WhatsApp friends and Twitter followers would actually contribute 500 rupees and so on. What it tells me is that it's both a very, very powerful idea on how we can do social security for India, but also it tells us how India did social security in the past, right? I just want to read out something which is from Tagore, right? Now, bear me out. Tagore says that before the English arrived in India, the Samaj would carry out through its own initiative all the beneficial works necessary to meet people's needs. It did not look to the state to perform those functions. Kings would go to war or hunt, and some would even forsake all their princely duties for pleasure and entertainment. But the Samaj did not necessarily suffer on this account. The duties of the Samaj were allocated among different persons by the Samaj itself. And the arrangement by which this was done was called dharma, right? So we were a welfare society long before we were a welfare state. And now what I feel is that by trying to get the state to be the agent of doing social security, we've lost the ability to mobilize society's resources to do the same thing. And if you look at the scale of India at which India operates, the diversity of the kind of job profiles, even before gig economy and the 21st century, right? I mean, we had this whole category called informal workers, which is a very weird thing. You and I know there's nothing which they do informal. I mean, they do real work, right? But you treat them as informal because they're outside the state's definition of formality, right? So I think as a concept, there is no solution to our social security needs that excludes mobilizing social resources, the Samaj's resources. The state can do what it can, the markets can do what they can, but Samaj, as society, Indian society as a whole, has to be mobilized, and we have to find ways to bring that in. I think that also answers the kind of problems which Renuka was posing in terms of where are you going to get the resources from. And I think to an extent, it also addresses some of the concerns which Nilanjan was saying in terms of how do
How
you.
would you answer the question of economists who say, look, society, you can't shake hands with society. You don't know who society is. Society is often very, very, very sort of unwilling. I mean, you prefer your son to your nephew, you prefer your nephew to your neighbor, you prefer your neighbor to somebody in Delhi, and you prefer somebody to Delhi than to somebody in Belgrade, right? So I think that the notion that society has this global view or this view and will be willing to cross subsidize people they don't know, people far away, and pay for them. I mean, part of the immigration backlash is the social security being taken by the immigrants who didn't pay into the system, right? So there's a fairness element in social security, because all social security has cross subsidy, whether it's intergenerational cross subsidy or it's inter-income. So Samaj really complicates even more complicated actuarial calculations and just pure mathematical calculations. And then I'll come to Dr. Sinha, who really thinks about it from an employee and from an ILO perspective. But do you want to respond when you say Samaj? How Samaj? Who's
See,
Samaj?
I think the Samaj story has two aspects, right? I think the first thing is, as you mentioned, we are a caste community driven society, right? In the sense that in the past, at least, the social security that an individual got would have been from a loose caste community structure, right? Most of it came from an extended caste community structure if it was in the rural areas, and maybe in neighborhoods, etc., if it was in the urban areas. But nevertheless, they knew whom to call. There was no phone number for capital S society. But small s societies, always there is a number to call. There is a go-to person who will mobilize this for you, right? The challenge for us is how do you translate this to the 21st century, transcending those jati boundaries? Because we don't want to perpetuate a caste community driven social security structure, nor do we want to perpetuate a mohalla thug, the local gangster who arranges this for you, right? So you want to be able to do this in a fashion that transcends this. And I think technology holds part of the answer. We can discuss this.
Yeah, and you think it's scalable for 1.3 billion people?
I
It'll work
definitely think so.
It'll work for Luxembourg. It'll work for Singapore. Renuka, do you want to come in before Dr. Sinha?
Yeah, I think, the challenge that Nitin has raised is twofold. One is with urbanization, how do you make this happen? But two is you also have to integrate finance into this, right? So it's not just about pooling resources at a point in time when you're in trouble. It's you get more efficiency when you're able to use financial markets to spread the risk over time and over different groups, right? So I mean, the whole point of insurance is that the whole point of savings over long terms is that. So there is a time and a group dynamic here. And I think that's where formality of finance and informality of society sort of begin to clash. And it's not clear how that will work
That
without
can be bridged.
contracts and without it's an interesting question, but I think we need to bring finance into that equation as well.
Okay, Dr. Sinha, maybe you can now respond. You've been listening. You've been thinking about this issue for a long time. And been involved with the ILO, thinking from a worker perspective. How would you sort of respond to everything you've heard so far?
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, Manish. Thank you for including me in this group. I start from Nitin's point of view. That whether
I was afraid of that.
whether community
Yes.
or extended family can take up. I'm afraid, I don't know that is going to work or not, but we are increasingly becoming individualistic society where joint family has broken and all families are in such a situation that there's reluctance on the part of one family to stand for another family or another individual. And we see around old age people on the street being thrown out by the family. And it's not that I'm talking about one or two. In every city you go, you find that whether you are in India or elsewhere, you find that old age people are being thrown out by the family, directly by direct family. But let's not take the cases first. I'll just go to the basics. I'll take Renuka's issue also, but let me go to the basic. That first of all is that whether we as a collective feel that social security is a necessity or not. Now, if we look at the system, whether we look at Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, UN, ILO, every international body has said that it is a right. Constitution of India, I think section 37, article 37 and 38 and 42, whatever. It also emphasizes that social security is something that must be available to all the individuals. Then comes the issue what all of us have been raising, that where the money comes from. especially for a population of 1.3 crores or whatever, 130 crores. Government cannot be out of it. What I feel and what we have been discussing world over, that if a system is such that the leakage can be checked, and we have seen during the COVID time, which reference to which was made by one of us, that during COVID time, a lot of money was poured in for the purpose of protecting population. And I have list of states where huge amount of money were allocated for either pension or health care or whatever. So I think, frankly, money is not a big issue insofar state is concerned. The issue is whether we take it as a benefit or a right that has to be given to especially those who are living in a time where things are not as even as it used to be, the time which Nitin is referring to, the old time. Now, presently, the market is fluctuating so much, whether it's a businessman or a worker. If you put burden on them, then forget. It's not going to work. Since 1952, we have ESIC, EPF, and all the things. Look at the coverage. Coverage is limited to a smaller section of people. Majorities are out of it. And only a couple of days back, the annual survey of unincorporated enterprises that has come and clearly says that the majority of the workforce is in the incorporated sector, the informal sector that you're talking about, for which we don't have data. What could be done? You see, insofar Social Security is concerned, like what Manish you said, that it's not a new subject. And almost every country has passed through one example or another example, and then it has entered into a problem. Even the US is having problem, and even Europe is having problem with regard to funding. And those are the countries from where we can draw lessons. Even South Africa has something that can cover a large majority of population. According to what limited knowledge I have about this thing, if we can find a way to divide in two sections. One is what ILO suggests, that there has to be a minimum social security for everybody. Social protection floor, what they call it. Recommendation 102, 202, I think. Where it says that it should be non-contributory and it should come from the state. Any amount. And why I think it's important is that at the moment, majority of the workforce is not figure in the statistics of the state. We don't have enough data. That is one thing, that there has to be minimum social security for everybody. Whether the person takes it or doesn't take it is a subsequent issue. But the person has to come on the record of the state that, all right, we have so much. At the moment, we are talking about imaginary figures. Whether
And
we
what
talk
would be the
about
second? What would be the second? One would be
and
minimum
the
social
second should be the contributory. Second should be the contributory, where you find that both employer and the worker both contribute towards the social security.
Okay.
One more point I want to suggest before my times really goes up is that what could be the instrumentality for that? Whether we continue to base in India, for example, continue to base the social security coverage through employment contract, that you need to have a contract before coverage comes. And I'm talking from my own personal experience, because some years back, there was a proposal by the minister in public. He said that unorganized sector workers will be covered. And I have had discussion with the ESIC Director General at that time. And he said, well, yes, it is covered, provided I get the contract of appointment, and which is missing in the informal sector. What could be solution for that?
No, so let me come back to solutions when I'll ask everybody.
Okay.
So let me come back to the solution.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just only request you to, and when I come back to you, one of the most interesting debates in the Constituent Assembly were the distinction between fundamental rights and directive principles. They wanted to make education, healthcare a fundamental right, but they realized we didn't have the ability or the money. So they put that in directive principles, saying we would like to do it, but we can't make it justiciable and we can't guarantee it. There is a pragmatism because, the first budget of India, the total government expenditure in 1947 was 198 crores. In 1991, total expenditure was 75,000 crores. This year, it is 100 lakh crores. So since 1991, actually per capita GDP has gone up by less than 8 times, while government expenditure has gone up 150 times. So I think it's important to recognize this. And that's why I wanted to come to Yogi next, because Yogi, Renuka is clear that, the government can't afford it. Nitin wants society to do it, but it's hard to think about it. Dr. Sinha believes that society and employers have to do it. But in a world where employers have sort of moved to cost to company, in a world where employers don't live that long, in a world where employers have faced much more competition. Do you think all this is an unrealistic expectation from employers that we will provide social security, or is paying salary enough? I mean, as it is, it's hard, right? Life.
Thanks, Manish. Thanks. First of all, I'd like to state a small disclaimer. I'm not representing any particular organization or sector. I'd like to straddle both the employers as well as the employees when I make my comments, if it's
Yes.
okay with you.
Yes, absolutely.
First of all, the points that were made, I think, while they delve with the fringes of some of the issues, we need to go a little deeper. Article 41, 42, 43 of the Constitution delve upon social security benefits that need to be provided. It's a concurrent list subject by the state, provided the state has the funds. The question is that the state has to muster up the funds in some way, whether it's taxpayers' money or whatever it is, to make sure that the people who are even in the unorganized sector are covered. I think the biggest problem today in terms of flexibility of, if you take ESI Act and EPFO, which are two central legislations, is that unfortunately those who don't have a master-servant relationships, including gig workers, platform workers, etc., I don't know what happens to them. The labor code has good intentions to cover them, but I don't know when it's going to happen. It's very, very important to have them covered. Otherwise, they'll be left without any social security benefits, even in times of great need. In terms of flexibility, while of course it is a cost to the employers, I think employers should be given the option of opting out of the ESI Act, even for those who are below 21,000, provided they have facilities that exceed the facilities that are provided by legislation. I'm not sure whether that opting out is possible today. And similarly, opting in is equally important. SMEs, MSMEs, and so on, who are having so-called enlightened employers who would like to be included in the ESI Act or the EPFO, should be allowed to opt in. Also, for contributions which are more than 21,000, for salaries which are more than 21,000, in terms of the ESI Act, the employees could be given the freedom to make their contribution even if employers do not contribute. So that could be another reform in terms of flexibility. I would say that today, if we are talking about pensions, yes, it is true that the dependency ratio is getting more and more adverse, while of course India was the toast of the world in terms of the dependency ratio with a very young population. We have an aging population, and pension benefits is going to be quite a luxury. But I think it's very important to provide for that. I would say that some of the schemes that the ESI Act has are fantastic. ESI hospitals could be spruced up to make them as good as railway hospitals, defense hospitals, and so on. They have an unemployment benefit for up to 2 years in case a person is laid off or loses his job or her job, or for 90 days, depending on the circumstances, once in a lifetime. So the benefits are excellent, and I think it's important that the contributions continue. Now, I think before the panel discussion started, you alluded to the point whether it should be a part of the CTC or not. Of course, it should be a part of the CTC. It's a small amount, 3.25%, I think, in terms of the employer contribution, and 0.75 in terms of the employee contribution. It's very small if you look at the employee contribution particularly, but it is 3.25 is not that small. So I think it should be baked into the CTC for sure. And I think
But
that,
if you keep, may I ask you, because I face this question a lot about Haath wali salary and Chitti wali salary. So now for low wage employees, it's almost 35% if you add gratuity, PF, ESI, bonus, which all needs to be part of CTC. So essentially employers will be paying only 60. So the notion that mandatory payroll confiscation in a world of CTC, all it does is it reduces take-home salary. It doesn't increase salary, or you think it does?
I think this debate on take-home salary is a little more relevant for people who are, let's say, engineering graduates who join as executive trainees or graduate engineer trainees and so on, and then become officers or supervisors. I think for workmen, these kind of deductions and these kind of facilities are still extremely invaluable, and I don't think they're exorbitant. I don't know how exactly you got 38%, but if you, if you take all these
Yeah,
percentages.
I can give you the total. We've published that quite a lot. 24% PF, 7% gratuity, 4% ESI, Labor Welfare Board. It comes to about 38% for people if you monetize all the mandatory deductions.
But the employee's contribution is only 12% as far as the PF
Yeah,
is
so
concerned.
take home becomes 65% of what is written in the letter. And that is a social security issue, because government believes that if they prescribe benefits, they are over and above salary, because that's how it works for government. But let me come back to your, and do you have any other suggestions? And then I'll go
No,
one
I
by one.
was just about to say that the kind of benefits that both the ESI Act provide and EPFO provides are quite fantastic, if you ask me. ESI Act has very good empaneled doctors. I think they need to spruce up the facilities a little more. But these are invaluable and available at a very, very cost-effective method compared to most of the countries that I have heard of. So medical
But then why does
facilities.
ESI only have a claims ratio of 50%? I mean, see, in the US, if a health insurance company has a claims ratio of less than 85, they have to refund it. For the last 25 years, ESI has only spent 50% of the money it collected from employers, and less than 2% of, employers who are participating are report that they have high adoption. Maybe I'll bring in Renuka at this stage. What are your thoughts on ESI and EPFO reform, and respond to sort of Yogi on
So
that?
I think just on, insurance, look, in some ways, we have a great opportunity with ESIC, and we need to think about why it's not working. If you look at the private insurance market in other countries where insurance works, you find that there is a problem of asymmetric information where hospitals are fleecing customers because the insurance pay company is going to pay the premiums at the end of the day. And then insurance companies are denying claims because they think that the hospitals are overcharging them. And one way to solve this is for large insurance companies to then manage the relationship with large hospitals. Because as a single customer, I cannot but a large insurance fund can. And it can also push for protocols to be followed in, where standard diseases have standard protocols. And so you kind of have a sense of what the cost of something should be. And I feel that this has just broken down in India, where we are not able to design protocols, where we are not able to come up to reasonable costs, some sensible numbers that you should expect in different parts of the country for specific standard procedures. And this is part of the reason why the entire health insurance market is quite broken. And there are no ex ante incentives to take care of yourself before you go to the hospital in the first place. Now, ESAIC has an opportunity where it could be the big insurance player and set this right. Now, why it does not do so is a deeper question. And I think we really need to ask what is going wrong with the ESIC, because I agree with you, Manish, that with these numbers, it's a huge problem, and the funding of this is also a huge problem, right? So that's one thing that I would say, that there is an opportunity there. On the EPFO, I feel that even if you read the EPF Act, it is not really mandatory for anybody who earns above that threshold that of, I think it's 25,000 now.
15,000.
Sorry, 15,000. And therefore, the choice between EPF and NPS should just be possible at the time of joining. I'm not sure why large firms have not taken the risk, because our reading of the EPF Act suggests that this should be possible. There's nothing that tells you that you have to mandatorily be part of the EPF. And so large firms could begin by offering their employees a choice who can go to the NPS. And then what happens is that you have a choice of fund managers, and you have better regulated fund
Are you
managers.
suggesting that if today, as an employer, I wanted to pay my mandatory EPFO contributions to NPS, I can, because our legal opinion says no?
Yeah, so our sense is that there is no mandatory EPF contribution for above 15,000.
No,
And
no, for up to 15,000.
yes, for up to 15,000, you cannot. But for above 15,000, you could very well, you don't need to pay the EPF according to, and again, different, I guess one must get a legal opinion, but it's our reading of the act that if you're above 15,000, you don't need to do this. And you could very easily offer your employees the choice of NPS.
Okay. So one recommendation is NPS choice. Any
Yes.
other thoughts on the way forward on
Yes, and I think the huge sort of thing that we are not discussing enough is the investment regulations that we have both for the EPF and the NPS. So we have very strict investment guidelines where, we kind of mandate that X% of money must go into government bonds and Y% should go into corporate bonds, and then 15% is allowed in equity. And I think that we are really missing out on the opportunities for growing the pool, where you could do a lot better than what you're doing now. We have completely thrown international diversification out of the window. Portfolio diversification is the only free lunch, really. And we deny the opportunity of portfolio diversification and international diversification to the citizens of India. And I think that's certainly one fundamental place where the EPFO could change. And third, I'm sort of going to go out there and say that EPFO is in a weird place where it is the administrator of a scheme and the regulator of a scheme. Now, intrinsically, that can be problematic because there is no separation here between administration and regulation. And one way forward could be that the fund management of the EPF is also outsourced to funds regulated by the PFRDA. So you continue your collection and administration mechanism, but you either give the choice to the employees to choose whichever fund that is regulated by the PFRDA, and then you're on par with everybody else also in terms of how regulation, how
So four things
declaration.
you're saying ESI governance, NPS choice, international diversification, and unpacking the composite role of EPFO.
Absolutely.
Nilanjan, your thoughts on the way forward or recommendations on what we should be thinking about?
critical element that I would like to bring in, and at the cost of being provocative, is that we should have a composite social security fund to be managed professionally. We should have, which Renuka also has been alluding of, and it should be a viable front, something that is attractive to the private investors, so that private investment comes into it. A, managed by a professional fund manager. B, the second element that we should have here is the important role of philanthropy and CSR contributions coming in here. And in that case, of course, you have to have those incentive structures in place. If suppose somebody is putting in money in this particular element in this particular budget, then they should have the necessary tax holidays. They should have the whatever necessary incentives that need to be there. So, and as far as the interoperability is concerned, I go with Renuka. Those are some of the critical elements which are also prevalent in many other parts of the world. So possibly we should think in those lines.
Okay, Yogi?
I just want to quickly loop back to your question. Sometime back, we had read about the Social Security Bill 2017, where the contributions to be made to a Social Security fund would be 17.5%, to worker owners 12.5, self-employed persons 20%. Self-employed persons, that means gig workers, that means those who are in the unorganized sector where there's no master-servant relationship, where an employer cannot be identified. And then there was a gratuity fund of 2%. I am not sure about why the whole bill was sort of dropped or not taken forward, but I think it's an excellent model to revisit, maybe with modifications, and to pack it into the labor code.
I mean, it was dropped because it was impossible to finance. Unfortunately,
I know.
the golden rule is those who have the gold rule. So, so Nitin, your thoughts?
Manish, I think we need a multi-contribution social security system. It is just not feasible to do what, I mean, there's a whole lot of talk about the state paying for this. It's just not going to happen. We don't have the kind of tax base, and even if you have the tax base, you won't be able to do this as a state. You can't get only the employers to do it. And look at our employers; their productivity is low. They can't compete globally if they have additional cost structures imposed on them. So this burden or this responsibility of social security has to be split across all agents of society. There is no reason why a non-profit institution, a philanthropist, the Red Cross, the state government, the union government can put money into one account which belongs to a social welfare fund of one individual, right? Now, the good news is that today it is possible to create an India scale multi-contributor social security system because of digital public infrastructure, right? You have the Jandhan account, Jandhan Aadhan mobile Jam Trinity, which has already shown you that you can do this for direct benefit transfer. You have UPI, which has shown you that you can handle large account scale payments, right? So all you need to do is you have the building blocks, you put them together and put, I think, a solid financial systemic backing behind this, right? Because you and I can actually set up a system where we hold accounts on behalf of people, and you can put money into it, but that doesn't do risk management, right? So what you need the state for is to come back and back this multi-contributor social security system with the financial infrastructure, risk management, and all that stuff, which I think is the back end of social security. The
Nitin,
front end. Yeah.
the NPS, you're talking about the NPS here. Sorry.
Yeah, but the NPS, but Renuka, NPS, for example, I can't query the NPS database and say that, look, I have 1 lakh rupees and I want to give it to all single mothers in this zip code, in my PIN code, right?
That
I
would be
should
very
do that.
easy to do,
Very
but
easy to do.
yeah.
But it's not done,
No,
Yeah.
but anyway,
You
I'll
have
come back to
people,
this later.
my only question is, when you say the plumbing is the challenge, I think the plumbing we can find, but the question of offloading investment risk and longevity risk is something that you're not, because if you say that the government will underwrite both those risks, then I mean, I know we don't do accrual accounting in government, but if we did accrual accounting in government and underwrote this, then we would be finished, right? We do cash accounting. So it is the challenge of the US, which is, going to be tested in the next 4 or 5 years. So as I think we don't have to deal with this problem right now. But your view is that an individual account which can be financed from multiple sources, you had a defined contribution or a defined benefit account in mind?
It can be both. And I think that flexibility can be left to certain, I mean, this I would
But
leave
defined
to,
benefit is where there's longevity and investment risk. In defined
yeah.
contribution, there isn't. So the
Yeah.
the
It's
two
a
head
defined
in very different
contribution.
But this,
directions.
this I would
It's
think is a
a
kind of policy choice which the legislators have to make. I might have a preference, but I think this is a legislative question, right? It's a democratic answer. You need to come out with this. But what I cannot imagine how we're going to do social security in the 21st century if we don't have a model like this.
Okay. We already have the architecture. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Sinha?
Yes, I have a small suggestion. And the suggestion is for twin purpose. One is, of course, that we take a comprehensive approach, and the risk is a person is protected from risk in India. So I have suggestion one, that like we register death and birth, whether we can have social security number for everybody. In most of the European countries, they do like that. Even in US, you have social security number. So
So
we
what's
will
wrong with
know.
Aadhaar? What's wrong with Aadhaar?
Aadhaar, you see, is still problem with the Aadhaar. But if we have a social security number, separate number, altogether separate, that will
Why?
enable a
What's the
person
problem?
to.
1.3 billion Aadhaar numbers have been issued, no, now?
Yeah, but you see, one, it had the message has to go to the public at large that it can be used as a social security purposes also. But at the moment, Aadhaar is also sometimes is questioned. So I will suggest that whether we can have a specific number, each individual
We
having
issue
a social
another
security number.
issue another 1.3 billion numbers to people?
Well, what is the
I mean,
problem?
but
What is the
because
problem? We
because
have
Aadhaar
we have
was
a we have a birth certificate. We have a death certificate. Why not that one also? That is my suggestion.
okay, that would be your
You
thought. So
see,
one is issue a social
and the
security number.
second, I would say that a minimum social security should be available to everybody, and that why I'm saying that one is that at least we should have a data with regard to a concrete data with regard to how many people are to be covered or not to be covered, something like that.
Okay.
And then the remaining should be contributory, both employer and employee, not only employer alone.
But what would be your level of minimum? Would it be half of per capita GDP? Would it be 1/4 of per capita GDP? I mean, when you say a minimum, there's a difference between a minimum wage and a living wage. A minimum wage is an arithmetical concept. A living wage is a philosophical concept. My kid's definition of living wage is different from mine, and mine was different from my parents. So, what do you mean by minimum? I mean, is it because if you
See,
were to pay half our per capita GDP as social security to the 30% of, say, India, which is employed poverty, that would wipe out tax receipts. It would be 14% of GDP. It would
even
wipe
the
out
Supreme
tax receipts. So how would we do this minimum thing?
Even the Supreme Court has said that if an employer is not in a capacity to pay the minimum wages, the employer has no business to do business. But I'm not going there. I'm not going there. I'm looking at a situation where an employee, a worker, not employee alone, a worker gets some kind of protection against the market fluctuation. And at the same time, the whole burden does not go on employer. And
Okay.
why I'm saying that the state has the, why I'm saying
Doesn't
the
go on
state has the
employer. Who
capacity.
should it go on?
Sorry?
The state. Who should if it doesn't go on employer, then who should it go on? The state is what you're suggesting.
Is the minimum has to be provided by the state.
Okay.
That is under, see, the minimum protection has to be provided by the state. That is what all the global agreements are saying, where the India is signatory.
Sure. But
And
is
that
the
and the
practicality of
minimum,
that, sir? Is the
no,
practicality
minimum,
of that?
you see, even the constitution says that depending upon the capacity of the
Yeah.
nation, right?
Yeah.
Now the capacity, you can say that I have a 100 rupees capacity, for example. Let's give 100 rupees protection to everybody. And why I'm saying is that at the moment, we don't have the records available. At least the data will be available to us. And on that, we can formulate policy.
I mean, we have now a direct benefit transfer linkage through Aadhaar. 350 million people receive direct benefit into their Aadhaar linked bank account. So, if tomorrow you wanted to pay 100 rupees to every Aadhaar holder who had a bank account linkage, which is today about 700 million out of the 1.3 billion, I would suggest plumbing is not the issue. It is capacity. It is shamta. I mean. Dr. Ghosh or Yogi, do you want to come in here on practicality?
One statement, Manish, one statement before you take Ghosh. COVID has showed that we have capacity.
Okay.
During the COVID, the amount of money came out. I don't know where it went, but the amount of money came out. The state has capacity.
Yeah. I would
And
just
then
submit that when a patient is in the ICU, we do things, it's called a triage. If a patient is in the
we need to
ICU,
develop a system. We need to develop a system so that we don't end up again a situation like that where the state has to bring in all resources for one specific purpose. The system is not working as of now.
yes. Dr. Ghosh?
Yeah, in fact, my idea remains more or less the same, that we need to have the private sector involved in this process. So create this product so that there is a clear ROI, a return on investment of the money that I put in fact, in this particular fund. B, look at the size of the wealth of the nation. It today stands at to the tune of 20 trillion US dollar as far as Indian wealth is concerned. I'm not talking of income, I'm talking of the wealth. Can we mobilize maybe 1% of that every year?
Okay. I
So
mean,
possibly it's an entire
my
gap.
sense is that there are only limited pockets to sort of
Yep.
take from, right? There is the government pocket, which is either debt or taxes. We may be reaching our limits on that, but maybe people feel that there are no limits.
So that
Employers.
is where I'm taking Nitin's point essentially. So it is the society, the social endeavor to essentially finance this entire initiative. That 1% of the total wealth of nation for social security.
Okay. Yogi, do you have any final thoughts on the way forward?
Sure. No, I think with the aspirations of the country, Viksit Bharat, and many other aspirations to hit a 5 trillion economy and things, we just need to, as a country and as various states, set aside money for good social security benefits. I was pleasantly surprised to know that if you take the ESI Act and the Maternity Benefit Act, we provide better maternity benefits than the United States. Not that that's a role model, but the US has maternity benefit in just 3-4 states. So I think we need to develop a model in which we can pride ourselves to be a nation that cares for its people, and whether it is funding from the state or funding from the central government or whatever, I think it's very important to see that the minimum. One solution could be, Manish, that some of these percentage figures that we're talking about could be up to figures. That means if a person wants to be included and wants to contribute, you can scale down the percentage. It's a radical idea, but I don't know whether it'll work. But it could be one idea to contain costs.
Nitin, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm just coming from a view that, look, we've tried many solutions. We've tried platitudes. I think we've just got to figure out to declare Chapter 11 on bad ideas, right? And look for ideas that work, and then back them up. Not try and continue to refrain old ideas which just didn't work. They might sound good, but they don't really work.
Renuka?
I mean, I've said the fundamental issues of just fixing the product side problems of diversification and better annuity pricing, and therefore better issuance of financial instruments. So that's on the product side, and we have the NPS, and we need to find ways to encourage people to build retirement wealth through the NPS instead of starting new schemes under Ministry of Labor like PMSYM, etc., and new schemes for gig workers. I think it's not useful to anybody. We know that those boards don't work. We just need to find the pipes that will get money into the NPS and then improve the underlying issues with the NPS that I've mentioned earlier.
Yes. Sounds great. I think we're out of time here. I just wanted to sort of remind ourselves about why the Constituent Assembly made its distinction between fundamental rights and directive principles. They were also wanted to make education a fundamental right. They wanted to make Social Security a fundamental right. They wanted to make healthcare a fundamental right. But the debates are wonderful where they say, don't make promises you can't keep, because it diminishes the state. So I think the notion of Social Security, I don't think any one of us and all of us on the panel seem to agree about the desirability. The question was the doability. And, in my sort of limited point, I would say, my favorite poet is Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. He says, Shama shobhti us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only the powerful can be kind, benevolent, and generous. The weak cannot be powerful, the weak cannot be kind, the weak cannot be generous. And I think we are fourth right now, maybe third in total GDP. We are 128th in per capita GDP. So India is poor. We don't have to be, but let's not pretend we're rich. We're a poor country. We have to cut our clothes from the cloth we have. Let's make ourselves stronger. Let's make ourselves richer so that we can give a minimum social security to everybody else. But thank you for all for coming. There were some wonderful comments. There was a person who said, "Why should you give social security to rich people?" So everybody on this panel should not be included in the universal social security program that Dr. Sinha wants. We will opt out, but we should not have to opt out. We should not be offered it. But thank you all for coming. It was a wonderful discussion. It's a topic that we will revisit again and look forward to engaging with you all offline. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.